Hey, it's Drybear. Now, just yesterday, we went over the Krafton update, where the legal counsel representing Unknown Worlds, the original founders for Unknown Worlds that had worked on Subnautica and was working on Subnautica 2, had put out a brand new pre-trial brief that was kind of talking over some pretty big notes. Now, if you want to watch that video, that's on my channel. You can go check that out. We're not going to talk about that topic too much today, but just to recap it for people that missed it, the first thing is that, Krafton had already announced that they're going AI first. AI is now their priority. They also recently announced a opt-in or optional resignation program where you can get a severance package and leave the company because they're trying to downsize. And then the biggest reveal yesterday was that the CEO and the CFO of Krafton, some, Slack messages were revealed of what they were talking about. One, how to get out of the payment of paying Unknown Worlds their $250 million. And two, in verbiage, talking about how the best way to accomplish that would be to take over the company, go in, gut the leadership, put in their own leadership, and then the payout is no longer a problem they have to deal with, which is pretty big. However, today we actually had the CEO of Krafton, Kim, testify in court. I think he actually traveled to Delaware where this court case is being held right now in the United States. So he was there and he actually was, testified on the situation, on all of what's going on. So let's go through his responses. Again, this is the CEO of Krafton. He was around for the original agreement. He was a big, he's the leader, the person who's in charge, who kind of handled all of the firing of the ex-founders, getting the new CEO involved, trying to get Subnautica 2 delayed and all of that. So he's kind of the linchpin on all of this. Doesn't necessarily mean that he was involved in all of it, because sometimes that's delegated, but in general, he would be the primary perpetrator in this situation, regardless of what side of the case you're on here. But honestly, as time goes on, it's looking more and more like a slam dunk for Unknown Worlds and less like there's any kind of integrity for Krafton here. But again, I'm just reporting, so we're gonna try and be as neutral as we can and try and focus on that. So Kim testified it in court. I think it was late last night or technically in the morning, depending on where we're actually looking at this here, but stated that Krafton was unaware that two of the founders, Cleveland and McGuire, had stopped contributing to Subnautica 2, period, which means that Kim is saying that at a certain point in the project, he thought the founders were working on Subnautica 2, and then he was surprised and shocked and Pikachu-faced when he found out, allegedly, that the founders were no longer working on the project at all. He also claimed both former executives were given the opportunity to return to their posts, but rejected the offer. This one is a little loose. There is possibly some grounds for this, but based on what I've seen, this could just be he said, she said, a little bit of kind of individual perspective on this. So we'll have to see if this actually comes out in court and if this is true or not. And he says that Cleveland specifically was determined to pursue unrelated movie projects. So again, if you didn't follow the lawsuit from the beginning, the Unknown Worlds founders were removed. Then they filed a breach of contract lawsuit against Krafton. Krafton came back and said in a court report saying, hey, they stopped working on the project. They weren't shipping the game. The game wasn't ready. It was a big problem, and they were an issue for the company, and they needed to be removed. And then, a month and a half, 2 months later, they said, well, actually, we're no longer saying that the game wasn't ready. There are other problems that are worth talking about, like the absent landlords of the founders not being part of the project, but now they're no longer saying that the game was not ready, which was a huge turning point for them. He even went on to say that repeatedly stated that Krafton would never have spent the initial $500 million to buy the majority control of Unknown Worlds in 2021 had it known that the leadership team would allegedly seek to abandon their post. So now their story that they're going with right now is that they abandoned the post, the leaders were being paid executive salaries while doing nothing to further the game at all, and that's why they were fired in general. Now, in case you missed it yesterday, these were the Slack messages that were posted up as part of that trial, showing the then CFO of the company saying that, hey, we don't want to make this payout. It's going to be a lot. We want them to settle for 10%. They were originally offered $250 million as a incentive rewards based payout for Unknown Worlds and the executives. And then they found out that they were going to be paying about 191 based on revenue up until May 2025. And then the CFO here is saying that you know, they're asking for less than 191, but they still want like 115 million. And he's saying, no, well, you know, we tried to offer 10 million and they didn't take it. They refused to accept that. And his response was, it might be easier to just take over, right? So, and then the CEO responding here with, again, admittedly, a bit of a nondescript response. It's hard to tell what he's responding to here, but you could take this as him saying, okay, set up the date to take over the company. Let's shut this thing down. Now, back to his testimony, he says that there wouldn't have been any deal, right? So if he knew that the founders allegedly would stop working on the project entirely, then he never would have made that $500 million purchase with the added $250 million incentive to work harder and publish more. So when asked what would have happened if Cleveland had informed him before the acquisition that he wanted to stop making video games, he would say, yeah, there wouldn't have been a deal at all if I knew that the founders weren't going to work on the game, allegedly. Then he was asked to kind of further iterate that kind of topic is, you know, would you have given the founders, operational control of Unknown Worlds if you knew ahead of time that Cleveland and McGuire would allegedly abandon the game? Which is a very, like, I have to imagine this came from the defense team, because obviously this is a very leading question of like, hey, when those guys did the bad thing, would you have done the right thing if you knew they were going to do the bad thing? So it's kind of like a toss-up question here. But of course, his response and testimony was the single purpose of Unknown Worlds is to make games. And if they are not making games, I don't think there is no meaning for them to have any operational control. I don't think I would have given it to them at all. So he's sitting there, you know, on testimony, getting asked questions by the attorneys on both sides of like, hey, what's going on? And he's saying that the founders didn't do anything. They stopped working on it. If I knew they were going to quit and stop working on the game, then I wouldn't have bought the company and I wouldn't have put them in control of the project because they are the problem, is what he's saying. Even saying that I believed that the fans would eventually get disappointed. And this is something that we saw like in June or July, like it was a couple months ago or like earlier on this year, where he's saying that like, hey, you know, fans would have been disappointed by the state of Subnautica 2. And it's kind of interesting that he still is touting this, considering the fact that, you know, officially in the court documents, Krafton has abandoned their idea that the game wasn't ready for early access. They've, you know, redacted it, and they've also, well, not officially redacted it, they've reneged on it, and they've also just stopped touting it in general. Like they've stopped saying that as one of their things, whereas this is kind of like in that same vein. Kim also questioned why Krafton would now allow the former executives to return to their posts. And this one is actually really interesting, right? Because this line of questioning is now saying that, hey, in a world where the founders of Unknown Worlds get reinstated. Like they actually get their positions back. They're put in operational control of Unknown Worlds, and they're also put in director roles on Subnautica 2. This is actually being taken seriously by Krafton, which sounds like they might start to think that they might not be the winners of this case in general. So if, you know, now being asked, hey, what would happen if the founders got reinstated and put back into it? What do you think would happen? And of course, the Krafton CEO's response is, these are the people who rejected our proposal for them to return to their posts. So, you know, this is the part of their statement is they're saying that the founders abandoned their roles. Krafton came in and said, hey, we'll give you more incentive to return to your role. Please, we just want the game to come out. Please just come back to work. And then they were given that offer, and then they, you know, the founders rejected the offer because they're lazy and didn't want to do anything. So that's kind of his post. And then so why they would like to return now and what they are going to do, I'm not sure about that. So he's saying that even if they did come back, they probably would just go back to, again, in Krafton's perspective, not work on the game. Going on to say, and currently the development team is pretty stabilized. I do think this is true. If you go to the Subnautica 2 Discord, if you look at the dev updates, it does seem like they're full steam ahead. It seems like they've been given new orders by Krafton. Fix this, add this biome, add that content, work on this. You're not going to early access in the summer of 2025, as 2025 is now almost over, but they're now moved to 2026, and it does seem like the dev team, whoever's taken up the reins after this whole debacle, they are moving forward at some pace in general. So I think he is definitely right in saying this, and they're working on the development in earnest. So I am concerned about their potential return if they do return. So he's concerned that if the founders come back, then Subnautica 2 is going to be ruined again. And thirdly, the trust is, I think, already broken. So I don't think we're in a state that we are, or can be ready, or can work with them again. So this is obviously him just kind of speaking off the cuff in general. But he's saying that, you know, one, They were removed for cause, which is still up for, determination inside the courts in general as they argue this case, throughout the months here. But he's saying that not only were they bad for the team, that now they're entertaining the idea that they might be reinstated. And he's saying if they were reinstated, again, obviously they're going to say that that's going to be problematic in general. Then as the testimony went further, things got kind of weird, right? So whether Subnautica 2 was primed for early access launch, as the former leadership says, like, this is a great thing, and I'm guessing this came from Fortis, like the attorneys representing the founders here. This is a great question of like, hey, you guys said the game wasn't ready for early access. You put out that report of saying, hey, here's the amount of content that's done, and here's the amount that was expected, and you didn't meet that mark, so there's problems. And so they just came up and said, hey, okay, put your money where your mouth is. You said this, so what's going on? Like, why are you no longer saying this in general? So why did you say that that it wasn't ready? And Kim said Krafton could probably have generated some sales. So some sales had it pushed ahead with the original plan, but suggested the title lacks freshness in the current guise. So now their point is not that the game wasn't ready for early access, not that the game was undercooked or didn't have enough content, it's that it lacked freshness. Like, it wasn't cool enough or wasn't good enough or wasn't, deserving of a sequel of one of the most beloved survival games in the industry of games history, right? So like, he's saying that it just didn't have enough, which that could be true. That certainly could be true. You could say that it felt like it was worse than that. I mean, there are a lot of people that didn't like Below Zero, which was the prequel to Subnautica. I loved Below Zero. You'll see some Below Zero footage on here as well of me playing and enjoying that game in general. But you could make an argument that maybe some percentage of the community would have thought that Subnautica 2 wasn't good enough to warrant the title of the second Subnautica, or technically the third Subnautica. And he continues his point by saying, because the fans already had a lot of expectations for the sequel, there might be some sale that would occur initially. However, because the lack of the content in the game, the lack of the freshness of the game, I believed that the fans would eventually get disappointed. And if that was the case, then actually the future of the franchise would be greatly impacted, was what I was thinking. So this is... What's kind of interesting here is this is very passive language. This is not, there was a problem, the game sucked, it would have been a problem. It's, I was thinking, I believe, I had expectations, it's possible, I believe that the fans would get disappointed. It's very subjective, and this is kind of interesting that, as the CEO of a billion-dollar company, you would think that he would have his own legal counsel. They would probably prep him for going up on this, doing a testimony and actually being questioned in court in a different country in general. But this just feels like very passive, like, I don't know, it seemed like it was kind of bad. Now, from that, at the same time, Krafton was questioned about this whole, Kim asked ChatGPT how to get out of the payment, and there's, these Slack messages about the CFO and CEO, conspiring to take over the company and kick the old founders out, and all of that business in general. And so Krafton specifically had a spokesperson that was questioned about this. And they said, the trial is currently ongoing, where we were making the case that the decisions we have made were all about ensuring the best possible experience for their players. So again, spokesperson-wise, marketing-wise, their point is that this was better for the Subnautica community. And there's definitely, there's that argument in the games industry of like, a bad game that gets delayed can eventually be good, but a bad game that's rushed out is bad forever. Not always true. No Man's Sky, Cyberpunk 2077, a lot of games have come out bad and turned themselves around. And also there's a lot of games that were very mid and still beloved by a lot of communities in general, but that's kind of their official stance. As we have made clear, we were forced to make a change when the former leaders showed little interest in the development of Subnautica 2, which has always been our top priority. And as is the case, anytime you have like corporate speak against corporate speak, it's always, they have like a checklist of things they do: disparage the opponent, discredit the opponent, focus on what people can rely on, like, we believe in the community, we're all for gamers at the end of the day. And so they follow up with this, saying, now this trial comes down to the plaintiffs asking to be restored to jobs they were not doing, they had no interest in doing, and had previously declined requests they would come back and do those jobs. We look forward to continuing to present our evidence before the judge and are confident we will prevail and be allowed to continue our incredible progress. Now, what's interesting about this situation is it does seem like they're speeding towards towards some kind of decision being made on this, right? The trial will last, I think the trial is actually ending this week in general, but it doesn't mean that it's completely over, right? There's post-trial arguments and other things like that, but it does seem like, you know, after, gosh, several months, this is a pretty fast trial in general, it seems like they're trying to wrap up the trial and make a decision here. And based on the way that Krafton is already kind of saying that, hey, if the founders came back, it would be a big problem, it seems like Krafton is starting to admit that they might lose this case, that the founders might be reinstated into Unknown Worlds, and Subnautica 2 might have change in control passed over again based on the court hearings here, which is kind of interesting. So we have the trial concluding soon-ish, and then we also have some post-trial arguments, you know, some follow-ups, I think, in January. So we probably won't know what the final, you know, result of this is until January, so 2 months time from now, but it's possible over the next couple weeks we will get some new updates in general like we did yesterday and today. So let me know where your head is at on this one, on how you feel about Unknown Worlds. I know some people are just kind of done with the whole thing in general. It is kind of interesting, and I do hope that, you know, justice is served here and the truth is completely plain. When we first started this, I'm very much the kind of person that's like, hey, just let the facts come out. I'm not going to make any judgments early, and I was very much on the fence in the beginning, but over the last few months as we've been covering this case, repeatedly, it's becoming more and more evident that Krafton was the perpetrator here, and they were doing some very shady things around how to kick people out of business in general like that. I mean, you know, you could also make the counter argument that, you know, as soon as you go public and you sell your company, you have no control over that, and it's within their rights to change leadership or change the project or change where the project is going. But you could also make the argument that as part of the purchase agreement made in good faith, that they said they weren't going to be involved in the day-to-day, and they weren't going to be involved into the release, and it's starting to seem like it actually was just about the payout and about Krafton trying to, you know, pad their bottom line and prevent having to give large amounts of money to Unknown Worlds for a project that was supposed to come out presumably in August this year. So, you know, like 3 months ago, we would have been playing Subnautica 2. We probably would have even had an update or two since then, releasing new content if Krafton hadn't started to get involved into the operational part of Unknown Worlds. So that's the next update. We got a testimony from the CEO at Krafton talking about this in general. Let me know where your head is at on this one down in the comments below. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.